Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to present to you an in-depth look into a powerful work titled A Tragedy in Four Acts, focusing on the theme of justice. On this first slide, you'll see the title and some thought-provoking elements, act-by-act summary, analysis, themes, and imagery. We'll explore how the machinery of the law operates, often indifferent to the human soul caught within it. To give you a quick preview, we'll delve into the structure of the play, the themes it raises, and the imagery that brings it to life. So, let's get started and uncover the profound insights this work has to offer. Now, let's take a closer look at John Galsworthy and his significant contributions. He's best known for his novels, collectively called the Forsyte Saga, but he also wrote plays like Strife and The Silver Box. Among these, Justice stands out as his most socially impactful play. It's a powerful piece that uses clinical, naturalistic dialogue, meaning the characters speak in a very realistic way, without much sentimentality. This style allows the system itself to speak, making the message more direct and compelling. Galsworthy's style is very much rooted in social realism. He aimed to expose important issues like class inequality, prison conditions, and institutional injustice through his work. One notable example is Justice, which premiered at the Duke of York's Theatre and even influenced Winston Churchill to reform solitary confinement in British prisons. That's a clear sign of how theatre can impact real social change. Interestingly, Galsworthy was trained as a barrister, which deeply informed his worldview. His background in law gave him insight into the legal system, which he often portrayed in his dramas as a reflection of societal flaws. He was also recognized internationally, winning the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1932. Galsworthy's work, spanning from 1867 to 1933, remains influential because he used drama as a means to challenge injustice and promote social awareness. So, in summary, Galsworthy's legacy is not just in his storytelling, but in his ability to spotlight critical social issues through a realistic, impactful lens. In this slide, we're looking at the central conflict in the play, individual conscience versus institutional justice. This is a theme that runs through the entire story and really gets to the heart of the moral dilemmas faced by the characters. The play is structured into 4 acts, each representing a different setting, starting at a law office, moving into the courtroom, then prison, and finally a return to society. These acts help us see how the protagonist's journey unfolds across different social environments and legal spaces. The law, as depicted here, is shown as impersonal and mechanical. It often seems more like a system than a human institution, which can clash with personal morals and conscience. The antagonist in this story is William Falder, a junior solicitor's clerk. His character embodies the rigid, often unfeeling nature of the legal system, but also the moral challenges within it. The protagonist is set in Edwardian England, early 1900s, a time of strict social codes and evolving legal standards. This historical context is key to understanding the social pressures and moral questions at play. This play is classified as a social problem play, or a tragedy, highlighting how personal and societal conflicts lead to tragic outcomes. Finally, Play at a Glance summarizes these elements, giving us a quick overview of the themes, how personal conscience clashes with institutional justice, and how that tension plays out through the structure of the play. All of this ties into our overall theme of exploring moral dilemmas within societal and legal frameworks. Let's start by reflecting on that quote from John Galsworthy. Justice is a machine that, when someone has once given it the starting push, rolls on of itself. This metaphor really captures the idea that once a legal process begins, it tends to unfold and move forward, often beyond individual control. It emphasizes how justice, once set in motion, can become self-perpetuating, which is a crucial concept in understanding how legal systems operate. Now, looking at the key points here, we're talking about the nature of justice as something that can be initiated by a single action, like a push, but then continues independently. This is especially relevant when we consider cases like crime, discovery, and the forging of a check, which is the focus of this particular case study. in the context of the overall theme of our presentation, how justice is pursued and how legal processes unfold. This quote reminds us that initial actions, whether criminal or investigative, can set off a chain reaction. Once a crime is discovered, like the forged check in this case, the process of investigation and legal proceedings begins to move forward, often driven by the machinery of law itself. Here, in the law office of James Howe & Son, we're at the beginning of this process. The Act 1 suggests the start of a story, of a crime being uncovered, of evidence being examined, and of justice beginning to take its course. It illustrates how, once a suspicion or an accusation is made, the legal system is set into motion, rolling forward until the case is resolved. So, as we explore this case further, keep in mind how the initial push, perhaps the discovery of the forged check, sets everything else in motion, highlighting the relentless and often self-sustaining nature of justice in action. Let's start by looking at the key moment when Walter Howe pleads for leniency. He argues that Falder is still young and that his motive was rooted in compassion, which might evoke sympathy. On the other hand, James Howe insists that the law must be upheld and followed strictly. This sets up an important moral debate about justice versus mercy. Ultimately, they decide to call the police, showing the importance of law and order in their decision-making process. Moving to the next point, we see the forgery itself. Falder, in a desperate attempt to fund his escape, alters a check from £9 to £90. When this forgery is discovered by Coxon and the Howes, a difficult question arises. Should they prosecute Falder for his crime? This dilemma highlights the moral conflict faced by those involved, balancing the desire for justice with compassion. Now, let's consider Falder's personal situation. He is in love with Ruth Honeywell, a married woman trapped in an abusive relationship. Falder's hope is to help her escape by taking her to South America, away from her brutal husband. This adds a layer of complexity to his character, showing his motivations are driven by love and a desire to protect. Finally, we are in the offices of James Howe & Son, a solicitor's firm. Here, we see the working environment with senior clerk Coxon and junior clerk William Falder working alongside the senior partners, old James Howe and his son Walter. This setting helps us understand the professional backdrop of the story, where legal and moral issues intersect daily. This slide, number 5 of 25, helps us explore the moral and ethical challenges faced by those involved, setting the stage for the ongoing debate about right and wrong in the story. On this slide, we see that the audience understands the compassion behind the crime, but the legal machine cannot. This is a key example of dramatic irony, where we, as viewers, grasp the human story that the law remains blind to. Ruth, for instance, has no voice. She's just property of her abuser in the eyes of the law. Falder's only recourse is criminality, highlighting how the law fails them before he even acts. Now, looking at class and power, James Howe's decision to prosecute becomes the engine of the tragedy. He feels bound by law. He can't grant mercy without undermining it. Galsworthy's critique begins right here, exposing how institutional rules can trap individuals. Next, we come to the pivot, which is the well-meaning but rule-bound clerk. He embodies institutional thinking. He doesn't want harm, but he's caught in a web of procedures he can't override. This shows how bureaucracy can hinder justice. Then we see Coxon, who differs from typical criminals. Falder acts from love and desperation, not greed. This humanizes him and challenges our moral assumptions about who is truly the villain. Moving on to Falder's motive, Galsworthy carefully establishes social hierarchy. The employers hold moral power over clerks, and the setting, the respectable law office, is deeply ironic because justice is about to be denied. Finally, in the exposition, we're set up for Act I's dramatic analysis, laying the groundwork for understanding how social structures and individual choices collide, driving the tragic outcome. Now, let's focus on a crucial principle in our legal system, the idea that the prisoner is not on trial for his motives, but for his act. What does this mean? Essentially, it highlights that the court's primary concern is the actual action taken, not the reasons behind it. So even if someone had a good motive, it doesn't justify illegal behavior. This ties into the concepts of the trial and verdict, where the machinery of law is designed to evaluate whether a specific act broke the rules, regardless of personal intentions. It reminds us that justice aims to assess actions objectively, ensuring fairness and consistency. As we move through this part of the presentation, keep in mind that this focus on acts over motives is foundational to how we uphold the rule of law. It ensures that everyone is judged based on what they did, not just why they did it, which is essential for justice to be truly impartial. In this moment, we see the most devastating part of the trial. Fowler says almost nothing. He's swallowed by the system. The verdict is passed in complete institutional silence, emphasizing the impersonal nature of justice. Here, Fowler's silence speaks volumes about how individuals can become lost within the machinery of law. The judge recognizes that there might be some human sympathy for Fowler, but ultimately, he states that the law must be upheld. He sentences Fowler to 3 years of penal servitude, which includes solitary confinement. This highlights how the legal system prioritizes strict adherence to rules over personal circumstances. On the other side, the Crown insists that the law cannot be flexible based on motive. Society relies on deterrence, they argue. Whether it's forgery or any other crime, the amount involved is irrelevant. The law treats all cases equally to maintain order and discourage future offenses. The defense, however, focuses on Fowler's mental state. They argue that he was under extreme emotional strain, driven by love and compassion, and they call for mercy. This introduces the ongoing debate about whether justice should consider personal circumstances or only strict legality. Fowler's plea is straightforward. He admits guilt. He is charged with forgery, and by pleading guilty, he accepts the full weight of the law. The courtroom, judge, lawyers, jury, all stand as symbols of the impersonal, procedural nature of justice, emphasizing how the law functions as an overarching, impartial force. Now, the title justice takes on its fullest irony here. What we see in practice is justice that is precise, lawful, but utterly inhuman. This highlights the disconnect between the ideal and the reality. Let's talk about the concept of structural irony. For example, Fowler's silence is like theatrical gold. It's as if the system doesn't need his voice at all. He's already reduced to a case number. His humanity doesn't matter in this machinery. It's a stark reminder of how the system dehumanizes individuals. Moving on to Fowler's passivity, this is shown through the inclusion of solitary confinement, which is perhaps the most damning aspect of the play. Galsworthy did his research on real prison conditions, and in Act III, he dramatizes this horror to make us feel the brutality firsthand. Next, the sentence of 3 years penal servitude is portrayed as sympathetic yet helpless. It's important to note that the judge isn't depicted as a villain. Rather, Galsworthy is critiquing the entire system. Even good people, within this framework, can unintentionally perpetuate injustice. Now, consider Ruth's position in this system. She cannot testify in a meaningful way, and her suffering isn't considered enough to serve as mitigating evidence. Her absence from the legal narrative underscores how women are often erased or marginalized in these proceedings. Finally, Galsworthy structures Act II as a kind of play within a play. The courtroom, with its wigs, gowns, and formal language, functions as a theatrical performance. It's a facade that masks the indifference of the legal system, making us question whether justice is truly served here or just performed. All these points connect to the broader theme of how justice, in practice, can often be a theatrical, dehumanizing process, something that we need to critically examine. This slide highlights what is arguably the most celebrated scene in British social drama, a powerful 6-minute sequence that is entirely wordless, yet incredibly impactful. It captures a moment of pure, raw suffering, allowing the audience to feel the intense emotional and psychological toll without a single line of dialogue. The scene focuses on solitary confinement, a form of punishment that can lead to profound psychological collapse. It's set in Dartmoor Prison, which is historically known for its harsh conditions. This setting amplifies the sense of isolation and despair experienced by the character. As we move into Act 3, this scene serves as a pivotal moment that underscores the devastating effects of solitary confinement. It's a stark reminder of how extreme isolation can break down a person's mental state, emphasizing the cruelty of such penal practices. Ultimately, this sequence connects with the broader theme of the presentation, shedding light on the brutal realities of the justice system and exploring the human cost behind these methods. It's a compelling visual portrayal of suffering that invites us to reflect on the ethical implications of punishment. Now we see Ruth facing an incredibly tough situation. She's been forced to support herself and her children, and this situation is pushing her toward destitution. In fact, it's so dire that it's suggested she might even turn to prostitution just to survive. This highlights the harsh realities faced by many women in her position during this time. Next, we have the old clerk visiting Ruth. He's clearly distressed as he witnesses her suffering. It's a moment of realization for him as he understands the full magnitude of the damage caused by the prosecution. It's a reminder of how the system's failures ripple through individual lives. Then we see Coxon visiting Falder. They observe that his mental state is worsening. Despite this decline, it's important to note that the rules of the system leave no room for systemic change. It's a stark reflection on how rigid the system is, unable to adapt or respond humanely to Falder's condition. We also meet the chaplain and the doctor, two figures who are fundamentally humane. The chaplain, in particular, sees Falder's deterioration and is empathetic. Yet they're both bound by regulations, acting as good cogs in a bad machine. It's a powerful metaphor for how institutional systems often prevent genuine compassion. Now we come to the prison governor, arguably the most impactful moment of the play, and perhaps of Edwardian theater as a whole. We see Falder alone in his cell. No words are spoken. Instead, we watch him pace, scratch at the wall, press his hands against the door, and then crumble. This silent scene lasts 6 minutes and is incredibly intense. Galsworthy uses this moment to dramatize solitary confinement, not merely as a punishment, but as a form of psychological destruction. It's a stark portrayal of the mental toll that imprisonment can take, stripping away the human spirit. Finally, we see Falder move toward the door, feeling it, this door that is all that separates him from the outside world. This simple act encapsulates the core of his suffering, the longing for connection, freedom, and normalcy. It's a powerful image that ties back to the overall theme of the play, the devastating impact of systemic injustice on the individual. Act III serves as the emotional climax of the story, where the tension and suffering reach their peak. From here, Acts IV offer resolution, but importantly, they cannot undo what has already been revealed here. This moment leaves a lasting impression on the audience, carrying that powerful image to the final curtain. Now, stepping off stage, Ruth faces exploitation in a way that highlights the harsh realities of the system. While the law manages to rescue Falder from forgery, it simultaneously abandons Ruth to an even worse fate. This irony is quite savage. It exposes how justice can be blind to real human suffering. Moving on to Ruth's parallel suffering, we see that characters like the governor, the doctor, and the chaplain all feel compassion. Yet, despite their feelings, they are powerless to act. Galsworthy shows us that systemic evil isn't necessarily driven by outright wickedness. Sometimes, it's the structure itself that prevents genuine intervention. When we look at Falder's physical deterioration, his packing and clawing, it becomes a visceral visual. These actions make his suffering tangible in a way that statistics never can. His body essentially becomes the visual argument against the brutality of the penal system. Galsworthy's research is also crucial here. He visited Dartmoor and spoke with penal reformers, grounding the scene in documentary realism rather than melodrama. This authenticity was so impactful that Churchill cited it as a reason to reform solitary confinement in 1910. Finally, the scene where suffering is conveyed through silence is one of Galsworthy's most radical techniques. Because the court's language is limited to words, the vastness of suffering goes beyond language. The silence compels the audience to confront the unspeakable, making it a powerful form of protest. The machinery of the law has done its work. What remains is ruin. In this moment, we see the undeniable power of the legal system to deliver justice, but also the devastating aftermath it can leave behind. This slide captures the harsh reality that sometimes, even with the best intentions, the results can be tragic. We've moved through the themes of release, attempted redemption, and now the tragic end. It's a reminder that justice isn't always neat or perfect. It can leave behind wreckage. As we return to the law office, think about how these outcomes reflect the broader narrative of accountability and consequence. This is the raw, unfiltered aftermath of the machinery of justice in action. Falder, overwhelmed by despair, throws himself down the office staircase. Tragically, he dies at the foot of the stairs. This moment highlights how he simply cannot endure the prospect of re-imprisonment anymore. It shows the devastating power of the law, which has finally crushed him utterly. Now, a detective arrives on the scene. Falder already had a prior warrant for deserting Ruth, who, importantly, was not his legal wife. This means he's facing rearrest and potential imprisonment, adding to the tragic complexity of his situation. Earlier, Falder believed that if he and Ruth could be together, he might find a way to rebuild his life. Walter Howe, a sympathetic figure, tentatively agrees to reinstate him, but only if Falder promises to behave himself. It's a fragile glimmer of hope, yet still uncertain. Ruth's situation is equally heartbreaking. She's been living with Clive, a man who supports her and her children. She loves Falder deeply, but she cannot abandon her children's security. The law that was meant to protect society has, in fact, destroyed 2 lives, hers and Falder. Coxon, a good-hearted man, steps in to advocate for Falder. He urges Walter how to take Falder back into employment, knowing that without a job, Falder will breach parole conditions and risk being re-imprisoned. It's a reminder of how social support and compassion are crucial in these situations. Finally, Falder is released on parole after 2 years. But he's a broken man, physically diminished and psychologically shattered. He returns to the law office, hoping for a new beginning, a chance at redemption. This entire sequence underscores the tragic consequences of the legal system, the fragility of hope, and the devastating impact on individual lives. It ties into the overall theme of how law and society can sometimes crush human spirit and relationships, leaving behind only despair. On this slide, we see that the play offers no clear resolution or hope. The final image, Falder's broken body, isn't meant to be a happy ending, but rather a demand on us as viewers. It challenges us to carry that image out of the theater and reflect on the system that created it. This leads us to the idea of catharsis without resolution. James Howe isn't portrayed as a monster. The judge is fair. The warders aren't cruel. Instead, Galsworthy's genius lies in showing us a tragedy that involves no single villain, only a monstrous, oppressive system. Falder's suicide is crucial here. It's his only act of autonomy because the system leaves him no other options. His death isn't melodramatic. It's an indictment of an inescapable, broken system that strips individuals of their choices. Similarly, Ruth's decision to choose Clive isn't villainous. She's acting as a mother caught in impossible circumstances. The law's failure to protect her from her first husband forces her into a terrible dilemma. It shows how the legal system creates impossible choices for vulnerable people. Even after Falder is released, he can't truly escape the system. Every parole condition becomes a new form of imprisonment. The structure of society is designed in a way that re-imprisons those it has already broken. The play's circular structure, ending where it began in the law office, emphasizes this. But now, that space is transformed. It's no longer just a symbol of respectable order. It's the place where a life ends, highlighting how the system's failures permeate every level of society. Let's take a closer look at some of the major themes that give this play its enduring power. First, we have the contrast between the individual and the system. This theme really explores how personal morality and choices are affected by larger institutional forces. Then, there's prison reform, which questions whether the current penal system truly serves justice or if it needs a fundamental change. Love and sacrifice are also central, highlighting how personal acts of compassion can challenge societal norms. Class and power reveal the social hierarchies that influence justice and oppression, while institutional dehumanization shows how systems can strip individuals of their humanity, turning people into mere numbers or cases. Justice versus mercy is a recurring dilemma. Should the law be rigid and uncompromising, or should compassion guide our decisions? All of these ideas are what give the play its lasting impact. They're interconnected and challenge us to think about fairness, morality, and the human condition. These themes are not just abstract. They invite us to reflect on how we, as individuals and as a society, handle issues of justice and compassion. Now, let's look at the differences between mercy, justice, and the human context. Starting with the human side, mercy is very much about understanding the person behind the act. It considers motives and circumstances, recognizing that people may act out of desperation or difficult situations. Mercy aims to protect individuals, acknowledging their humanity and complexity. It's often represented by figures like Walter Howe or Coxon, who act as defenders of those in difficult situations. However, it's important to note that mercy can sometimes be suppressed by strict procedures or rules that limit personal judgment. In contrast, justice is rule-based and impartial. It doesn't take into account the motives or circumstances of the act. Its primary concern is maintaining social order and ensuring that everyone is treated equally under the law. Justice is often represented by judges, prosecutors, and the law itself, more mechanical and inevitable in its application. So, when we look at the overall theme of justice versus mercy, we see a fundamental tension. Mercy offers compassion and understanding, while justice emphasizes fairness and order. Both are vital, but they serve different purposes within our legal and moral frameworks. Now let's consider his final act, suicide. It's often seen as the ultimate expression of personhood, yet even this is shaped by how society perceives him. Instead of seeing it as a personal choice, it's sometimes dismissed as weakness, co-opted as evidence that he was somehow lacking strength. Moving on to death itself, he's treated like a risk, someone to be monitored and controlled constantly. Every condition he faces serves as a reminder that he isn't free. The system never fully releases its grip. When he's on parole, he's reduced to a number within a cell. Solitary confinement strips away his identity, his ability to socialize, to be himself. In that process, the system forgets who he truly was. In prison, he becomes the prisoner, a label that erases his individual story. His motives are acknowledged but legally can't justify his actions. His name, his personal identity, is effectively erased from the record. And in the courtroom, Fowler is seen as just an employee, a function, not a person. His love for Ruth, the human aspect of his life, is irrelevant to the firm's reputation. It's all about the act and its legal implications. This connects directly to Galsworthy's core argument. Modern institutions, courts, prisons, laws, treat human beings as if they are objects. Their stories, their pain, their love, their context, these are all dismissed. Only the act itself matters in the eyes of the system. This theme of institutional dehumanization really highlights how these structures strip away the personhood from individuals, reducing them to mere cases, numbers, or acts. Let's start by looking at the first point. The £9 check that Fowler forged might seem trivial when we think about the economy. It's a small amount, after all. But what's striking is that this minor act still results in a harsh 3-year sentence of penal servitude. This contrast really highlights a key issue. Larger corporate crimes, sometimes involving much more significant damage, often go unpunished or receive far lighter penalties. Galsworthy suggests that justice is not applied evenly. Instead, it seems to be calibrated according to class. In other words, the legal system serves as a tool that favors the upper classes while punishing the lower classes more severely for minor offenses. Now, moving on to the theme of the law as a class instrument, we see that James Howe prioritizes the firm's professional integrity above all else, even over human welfare. He's more concerned about the reputation of the firm than about the real human consequences. Walter Howe, on the other hand, recognizes the human dimension, but is often overruled by his colleagues. This tension in the play vividly stages the conflict between institutional authority, embodied by the law and business, and moral or human authority, which considers fairness and compassion. Next, let's consider Ruth's position. She's arguably the most powerless figure in the play. She's married to a violent man she cannot divorce, and she has no legal recourse, no voice in court, nothing she can do within the law to change her situation. The same law that prosecutes Falder for a minor forgery offers Ruth no protection or justice. This stark contrast underscores how the law's fairness is heavily influenced by gender and social status. Finally, we see the class hierarchy at play. The Howes are professional class employers, holding significant social power. Falder, by contrast, is a working-class clerk. His crime, which harms their reputation, triggers a harsh legal response, yet they hold all the social power. This imbalance reveals that the law, as it was designed, primarily serves the interests of the propertied and upper classes. It reflects and reinforces existing social inequalities. So, in summary, this slide highlights how issues of class, gender, and power shape the justice system, often favoring the privileged while marginalizing the vulnerable. It's a powerful reminder of how deeply social hierarchies influence what we see as justice. Galsworthy distributes guilt across characters and the audience. We are all complicit in systems that crush individuals. This idea of collective responsibility is central to understanding the play. Coaxworthy's most comic character, Coxon, is also the most morally troubled. His goodness, while well-intentioned, is ultimately impotent within the institutional frame that confines him. It highlights how even the best intentions can be powerless against a corrupt or indifferent system. Walter's character reveals another layer of guilt. He knows the prosecution was disproportionate, and his late attempt to re-employ Falder is a cry for redemption. But unfortunately, it arrives too late, illustrating how guilt can linger and how attempts at atonement can be too little, too late. Ruth's sacrifice is perhaps the most heartbreaking. She sacrifices Falder and herself for her children's survival. But this isn't betrayal. It's an impossible choice forced upon her by a system that offers no good options. It shows how individuals are trapped by larger societal forces. Falder's guilt isn't just about the check he took. It's more profound, existential, really. He understands that the machinery he set in motion cannot be stopped, and his passivity becomes a visible sign of guilt. It's guilt as paralysis, showing how victims can become trapped by their own inaction. The relationship between Falder and Ruth is the emotional core of the play. Their love is genuine, but the law refuses to recognize love as a motive or an excuse. This disconnect underscores how the legal system often fails to see the human behind the crime. Finally, we see that Falder's crime is rooted in love. In a world where the law cannot help Ruth, love takes on the role of the only form of justice available, flawed, yes, but perhaps the only hope for true fairness. All of these points connect back to the theme that love, guilt, and conscience are intertwined, and that individuals, even within unjust systems, grapple with their own moral dilemmas. Let's explore how Galsworthy makes ideas visible on stage through various elements. First, we have legal language. Galsworthy often uses legal terminology or references to highlight themes of justice, authority, or societal rules. This helps us understand the constraints and structures within the story. Next, silence plays a crucial role. Silence can be powerful, creating tension, emphasizing moments, or revealing unspoken feelings. It invites the audience to reflect and adds depth to the emotional landscape. Then there's the body. Galsworthy uses physicality, body language, gestures, posture, to communicate characters' inner states and relationships without words. This visual aspect makes the characters' emotions more immediate and tangible. Moving on to light and darkness. These are classic visual tools. Light can symbolize hope, clarity, or truth, while darkness may represent mystery, fear, or concealment. Galsworthy skillfully uses lighting to underscore themes and mood shifts. Doors and enclosure refer to physical barriers or spaces that define or restrict characters. Doors can symbolize opportunities or obstacles, while enclosed spaces can evoke confinement or privacy. These elements visually frame the action and themes. Machinery and mechanism point to the use of stage devices or symbolic objects that suggest industrialization, progress, or mechanical routines. They can also reflect the mechanical aspects of society or the characters' lives. All these elements, imagery and dramatic language, are how Galsworthy makes ideas visible on stage. He creates a visual language that complements the dialogue and action, making abstract ideas concrete and emotionally resonant for the audience. By combining these tools effectively, he ensures that the themes are not just spoken but seen and felt, enhancing the overall impact of the play. On this slide, we see how light and darkness symbolize different worlds and states of being. Light represents the human and the natural aspects of life, while darkness stands for the institutional and the punitive. As Falder moves through the story, he gradually leaves the light behind, starting in the office's gray normalcy and progressing into the complete darkness of solitary confinement. The law office appears gray and administrative, a space that feels detached from natural life, whereas the prison is depicted as a place without natural light, emphasizing its harsh, unnatural environment. Throughout the play, doors serve as recurring symbols, whether it's the office door, courtroom door, or cell door, each one marking a boundary between freedom and confinement, agency and powerlessness. In particular, the cell door becomes a powerful symbol in Act III, representing a pivotal, harrowing moment where the boundary between liberty and imprisonment is most profound. The imagery of doors and enclosures highlights how the law is not a caring or humane force. Instead, it's depicted as mechanical, indifferent, and unstoppable. Galsworthy doesn't portray this machine as malevolent, but rather as inevitable. This makes the law even more terrifying because it's a relentless force that rolls on once set in motion, much like a machine. This idea is captured well in the line. Justice is a machine that, when someone has once given it the starting push, rolls on of itself. It emphasizes how the law, once triggered, continues its course independently, often without regard for individual circumstances. So overall, these images and symbols reinforce the play's core themes: the dehumanizing nature of institutional power and the loss of personal agency within the legal system. Falder's fatal fall down the office staircase is a powerful inversion of the usual symbol of social ascent. Instead of climbing towards respectability or redemption, the staircase becomes the very instrument of his destruction. It highlights how the same structure that defines social hierarchy can also destroy the individual who falls from it, emphasizing the peril inherent in social mobility. Moving to the staircase in Act IV, we see how the formal language of the law terms like the prisoner, the accused, and penal servitude are more than just legal jargon. They serve as imagery that erases the personhood of the individual, reducing them to a label. Galsworthy contrasts this cold, institutional language with the more informal, broken speech of characters like Coxon and Falder's simple replies. This contrast underscores the violence and dehumanization embedded in legal language. Next, we come to the 6-minute silent cell scene, which is a really radical choice in the play's dramaturgy. Galsworthy intentionally omits words here to refuse the comfort of articulate suffering. Silence, in this context, cannot be argued with or dismissed. It's a raw, unmediated expression of distress that transcends language. It's a powerful reminder of how silence itself can communicate pain more truthfully than words. Finally, in Act III, Fowler's body takes center stage as the primary text. His packing, his collapsed posture, and his frantic clawing at the door form a physical argument against solitary confinement that words simply cannot express. His body embodies the trauma and violence of his experience, revealing what words often fail to capture. It's a poignant reminder that sometimes, the body knows truths that language cannot articulate. Justice is arguably the most socially effective play written in the English language during the 20th century. Many commentators on British drama have highlighted its profound impact. Galsworthy, the playwright, was even awarded the Nobel Prize, and Justice is often cited as a prime example of his deep social commitment. Now, let's look at some key moments in its influence. In 1932, the play's first major production in New York helped raise international awareness about British penal conditions, which was quite significant at the time. Going back a bit further, in 1916, the play contributed to reforms in solitary confinement rules within British prisons. That's a clear example of how art can directly influence policy. Even earlier, between 1910 and 1911, Winston Churchill, who was then the Home Secretary, used justice to argue for prison reform in Parliament. This shows how the play was not just entertainment, but a catalyst for real political change. And when Justice premiered in 1910, audiences left in a shaken silence, indicating how powerful its message was and how it resonated deeply with the public. Overall, Justice's real-world impact and legacy demonstrate how a well-crafted piece of drama can challenge societal norms, inspire reform, and leave a lasting mark on public consciousness. So, do we call this justice? That's a really powerful question. When we look at mass incarceration, mandatory minimums, and how institutions often seem indifferent to individual circumstances, it makes us question whether what we call justice really exists in practice. These issues are at the heart of 21st century debates about fairness and moral responsibility. Justice, in this context, becomes a very complex and contested concept. Now, the relevance of this discussion endures because, as Galsworthy shows, calling the play Justice, while also illustrating its apparent impossibility, is his masterstroke. The word itself turns into an indictment. It's a critique of how justice is often perceived versus how it is actually delivered. This brings us to the title's irony. In Act III, there's a particularly dumb scene that highlights that suffering beyond words cannot simply be dismissed. It reveals that theater has the unique ability to evoke what arguments can't fully capture, emotional and human truths that lie outside logical discourse. And that's why silence here is so powerful. Sometimes, silence becomes the loudest argument of all. By depicting the legal system without villains or clear perpetrators, Galsworthy makes a more devastating critique that the system itself, structurally, is incapable of delivering true human justice. It's not about bad people, it's about a flawed framework. Finally, the machine, the system, indicts itself. It reveals how the very machinery meant to uphold justice often perpetuates injustice. And what does this teach us? It urges us to reflect on the imperfections of our institutions and to question whether true justice is even attainable within them. In conclusion, this play challenges us to think deeply about justice, not just as a concept, but as a reality we constantly strive towards, understanding its limitations and the urgent need for reform.